The dust had not yet settled over Europe when the first historians began writing the official accounts of how the war had been won. The narrative emerged quickly, as if the storytellers feared that names that would echo through decades were already being carved into the foundations of the future. Oppenheimer, Fermi, von Braun. But in a small apartment in London's Bloomsbury district, far from the prestigious universities and government offices where victory was being codified into history, Eleanor Winters sat alone at her kitchen table, reading these first drafts of history with a peculiar mixture of pride and invisibility. The morning light filtered through thin curtains, illuminating the newspaper spread before her, its headlines proclaiming the genius of men she had worked alongside, but whose shadows she had remained within. Her fingers, still calloused from years of precision work with delicate instruments, traced the outline of a photograph showing the Lancaster bombers, whose navigation systems had guided Allied forces with unprecedented accuracy during the final years of the war. Systems she had helped design but would never receive credit for. The kettle whistled softly on the stove, pulling Eleanor from her thoughts. She moved with the efficient grace that had defined her work during the war, a movement economy born of necessity when working in cramped laboratory spaces where a single misstep could ruin months of progress. The familiar ritual of making tea provided a momentary anchor in a world that had been upended first by war and now by an uncertain peace. The war had given her purpose, had forced open doors that would have remained forever closed to women like her in peacetime. Now those doors were swinging shut again as returning soldiers reclaimed their positions and women were thanked for their service before being ushered back to kitchens and typing pools. Eleanor had received her letter 2 weeks ago, a carefully worded dismissal that praised her contributions, while making it clear that her services were no longer required now that qualified personnel were available again. She poured the boiling water over the last of her rationed tea leaves, the steam rising like the ghosts of possibilities, now fading. Through the open window came the sounds of London rebuilding itself, hammers striking wood and metal, the rumble of trucks carrying away debris, voices calling instructions as new scaffolding rose where bombs had fallen. The city was healing its physical wounds, covering the scars of war with fresh brick and mortar. But some voids could not be filled with concrete, some absences marked only by silence. Eleanor's brother James had not returned from Normandy. Her colleague Martin had disappeared during a covert operation testing navigation equipment over occupied territory. The small team of engineers she had led, 4 women and 3 men deemed physically unfit for combat, but intellectually vital to the war effort, had dispersed like seeds in the wind, carrying their classified knowledge and unacknowledged contributions with them into a peacetime world that seemed strangely uninterested in what they had accomplished. The newspaper article mentioned a ceremony scheduled for the following week, honoring the scientists and engineers whose innovations had secured Allied victory. Eleanor knew she would not be invited, despite having solved the critical signal interference problem that had plagued the radio guidance systems, until her elegant mathematical solution had cut through the static. Her name appeared nowhere in the declassified reports, her calculations subsumed into the work attributed to the project's male director, who had called her "my right hand" in private, but never in official documentation. This erasure should have angered her, perhaps, but emotions like anger required energy she could no longer spare. Instead, she felt a curious detachment, as if watching her own history being rewritten from a distance. The knock at her door came at precisely 9 o'clock, just as the letter had indicated it would. Eleanor straightened her simple dress, checked her appearance briefly in the small mirror by the entryway, and opened the door to find exactly what she had expected. A man in a nondescript suit, his face forgettable by design, his manner polite but reserved. "Miss Winters," he said. Not quite a question, but not quite a statement either. "I'm from the ministry. May I come in?" He stepped aside wordlessly, gesturing toward her small sitting room with its mismatched furniture, salvaged from bombed-out buildings and second-hand shops. He declined her offer of tea, remaining standing even after she had seated herself, his eyes scanning the apartment with practiced efficiency, cataloguing details she could only guess at. "Your work during the war," he finally said, "has come to the attention of certain parties who believe your talents are still of value to the nation." He paused, seeming to assess her reaction, but Eleanor had learned during the war to keep her expressions neutral, to reveal nothing even when breakthrough or catastrophe occurred. It was a necessary skill in rooms full of men who expected women to be emotional, unpredictable. "There is a project," he continued, "of considerable importance. Highly classified, it would require relocation. Only then did Eleanor allow herself to smile, a slight upward curve of her lips that did not reach her eyes. "Relocation where?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of her heart. The war had taught her that opportunities rarely announced themselves as such, often appearing instead as inconveniences, challenges, or even threats. The man reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a slim folder which he placed on the small table between them. "Initially to Cambridge," he replied. "Subsequently, possibly abroad. The details are explained in the brief, though you'll understand that certain information can only be conveyed in secure facilities." Eleanor made no move to touch the folder, though her fingers itched to open it, to immerse herself once more in problems worthy of her intellect. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most. "Will my contribution be acknowledged this time?" The man's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered briefly in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or discomfort. "This project requires absolute discretion," he said carefully. "Those involved understand that history books may never record their names, that medals may never be awarded. The work itself must be reward enough." Eleanor thought of the article in the newspaper, of the names that would be remembered while hers and those of her team would fade into the classified archives, accessible only to those with the highest clearances and specific reasons to search through dusty files. She thought of the women who had worked through nights and air raids, who had reimagined theoretical physics and practical engineering while their husbands, brothers and fathers fought and died on distant shores. She thought of the casual dismissal in her termination letter, the patronizing thanks for filling in while real engineers were away, and she made her decision. "When would I begin?" The relief on the man's face was subtle but unmistakable. "Immediately. A car is waiting downstairs. You may pack essential personal items, but all necessary professional materials will be provided." Eleanor stood, smoothing her dress with hands that had helped guide bombs to their targets with unprecedented precision. "I'll need 10 minutes, she said, already moving toward her bedroom to pack a small suitcase. The man nodded, finally seating himself on the edge of her sofa, the folder still unopened on the table between them. Eleanor paused at her bedroom door, turning back to him with a question that had formed suddenly in her mind. "The others on my team during the war, have they been contacted as well?" The man's expression gave nothing away. "I'm afraid I don't have that information, Miss Winters." But something in his tone told her that she was not the only one being quietly collected from the margins of history, gathered up like valuable scraps others had carelessly discarded. The car journey to Cambridge passed in silence, Eleanor watching through the window as London's bomb-scarred streets gave way to the greener landscapes of the countryside. Spring had come to England, nature reclaiming spaces where human violence had temporarily interrupted its cycles. Wildflowers grew in the craters left by bombs. Vines climbed the skeletal remains of rural structures. Trees budded despite having absorbed shrapnel in their trunks. Nature knew how to heal its wounds, how to build new life from destruction. Perhaps humans could learn the same. The driver never spoke, and Eleanor did not attempt conversation. Her mind was already racing ahead to the project outlined in the folder, a theoretical leap in radar technology that would require reimagining the relationship between electromagnetic waves and physical objects. The elegance of the core concept appealed to her, though several critical technical obstacles remained unresolved. By the time they reached the outskirts of Cambridge, she had mentally sketched 3 possible approaches to the most immediate problem. The facility was not at the university as she had expected, but rather in what appeared to be a repurposed country estate several miles outside the town. Its Georgian facade suggested old money and hunting parties, not cutting-edge scientific research, but as they passed through multiple security checkpoints, the modern purpose of the building became apparent. The grounds were patrolled by armed guards whose uniforms bore no insignia. The windows of the manor had been replaced with designs that Eleanor recognized as minimizing both visibility from outside and the risk of eavesdropping through vibration analysis. Radio antenna arrays were partially concealed by carefully positioned trees, their metallic structures visible only from certain angles. The car stopped at the main entrance, where 2 guards flanked a heavy door, retrofitted with what appeared to be an electronic access system, technology that had been experimental during the war, but was apparently now operational. The driver spoke for the first time as he opened her door. "They're expecting you, Miss Winters. Someone will meet you inside." Eleanor gathered her small suitcase and the folder, now filled with her preliminary notes on the technical challenges outlined in the brief, and approached the entrance. One of the guards stepped forward to open the door, revealing a foyer that retained elements of its original aristocratic design while incorporating modern security features. A woman in a crisp uniform that was military in style but without identifying insignia waited just inside. "Miss Winters," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Captain Hayes. Welcome to Thornfield Research Station." Her handshake was firm, her posture military, but her smile seemed genuine. "We've been eager for your arrival. The team has been assembled, but we've been waiting for someone with your specific expertise before proceeding to the next phase." Eleanor followed Captain Hayes through corridors, where ornate moldings and aged wooden panels contrasted with newly installed fluorescent lighting and technical equipment mounted on walls that had likely once displayed ancestral portraits and hunting trophies. "The team?" Eleanor asked, curiosity finally overcoming her practiced reserve. Captain Hayes glanced back over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Yes, former colleagues of yours, among others. We've found that those who work together during wartime often collaborate most effectively during peacetime as well." They reached a set of double doors that looked like they might once have led to a ballroom or grand dining hall. Captain Hayes paused, her hand on the doorknob, and turned to face Eleanor directly. "Before we go in, there's something you should understand. Everyone beyond these doors has been selected not only for their technical abilities, but for another quality as well. They are all individuals whose contributions have been systematically omitted from official records, whose work has been attributed to others, whose innovations have changed the course of history without their names ever being associated with those changes." He paused, studying Eleanor's face. "We call them the invisible engineers, and we believe this arrangement has certain advantages that will become clear in time." Without waiting for Eleanor's response, she pushed open the doors. The space beyond had indeed once been a ballroom, its high ceiling now hung with industrial lighting fixtures, its parquet floor largely covered by workbenches, equipment, and drafting tables. But it was not the transformation of the space that caused Eleanor to stop abruptly just inside the doorway. It was the people. At the nearest workstation stood Martin Chen, whom she had believed dead after his aircraft disappeared over France in 1944. At a complex array of electronic equipment, Sarah Abramowitz adjusted settings with the focused intensity Eleanor remembered so well from their late-night work sessions in London. By the windows, deep in conversation, stood Professors Reed and Takubo, whose theoretical work had provided the foundation for Eleanor's practical innovations, both men having disappeared from academic circles after publishing papers that were immediately classified. And there, directing a small team clustering around a large schematic, was Dr. Elizabeth Fulton, the physicist whose calculations had made possible the miniaturization of key components in Eleanor's navigation systems, and who had been abruptly removed from the project just as it neared completion, her subsequent whereabouts unknown. As the doors closed behind Eleanor, the nearest people looked up, conversations pausing as awareness of her arrival spread through the room. Martin was the first to approach, moving with a slight limp that had not been part of his gait before his disappearance. "Ellie," he said, his familiar use of her nickname bridging the years since she had last heard his voice. "They finally brought you in." His smile was the same, though lines around his eyes spoke of experiences she could only guess at. Sarah joined them next, her greeting more reserved, but her eyes bright with recognition and something like relief. "Now we might actually solve the phase transition problem," he said, practical as always, but she squeezed Eleanor's hand with unexpected warmth. One by one, the others approached, a strange reunion of ghosts, people whose obituaries had been published, whose families had mourned them, whose contributions had been absorbed into the work of others who now received public accolades. Eleanor found her voice finally, looking from face to familiar face. "I thought you were dead," she said to Martin. "They told us your plane went down." He nodded, the shadow of something dark passing across his features. "It did. The official record is not entirely false, merely incomplete. I was recovered by resistance forces and spent the remainder of the war working with them on communication systems. When it ended, I was approached with an offer similar to the one you received today." Dr. Fulton joined them, her posture still military straight, her red hair now streaked with premature grey. "We've all followed different paths here," she said, "but we share a common experience of being erased from history while our work lives on." He gestured around the room. "Look at us, Eleanor. What do you see?" Eleanor studied the assembled group, approximately 30 people engaged in various aspects of what appeared to be a massive technical project. The diversity was striking, men and women in nearly equal numbers, a range of ages from barely 20 to well past 60, and a variety of ethnicities unusual in British scientific circles of the time. Understanding dawned slowly. "We're all outliers," she said finally. People who don't fit the expected profile of scientific contributors. Dr. Fulton nodded. Precisely. Women in fields where women are not welcomed. People of color in a white-dominated scientific establishment. Immigrants whose loyalty was questioned despite their contributions. Those with physical disabilities deemed incompatible with professional status. Those whose political views made them suspect despite their technical brilliance. We are the invisible engineers, the minds behind innovations that have shaped warfare and will now shape peacetime, without our names ever appearing in the public record. Captain Hayes, who had remained by the door during these reunions, now stepped forward. This invisibility is not merely an unfortunate circumstance we're asking you to accept, Miss Winters. It is a strategic advantage we intend to leverage. He surveyed the room with evident pride. The visible scientists, whose names appear in newspapers and history books, operate under constant scrutiny. Their movements are tracked, their communications monitored, their research targets identified by both allies and potential adversaries. But you, all of you, can work in the shadows. Your innovations can be deployed without alerting others to the capabilities we're developing. Your very obscurity is a form of operational security more effective than any classification system. Martin nodded, his expression serious. It's why I agreed to the arrangement. During the war, we saw how German scientific progress was hindered once the Allies identified key researchers and targeted them specifically. By keeping our most innovative minds officially reassigned, or even deceased, we protect both the individuals and their work. Eleanor processed this, understanding the strategic logic while still feeling the weight of personal erasure. And what exactly is this work we're doing in our convenient invisibility? She asked, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. Dr. Fulton gestured toward the center of the room, where a large model dominated the space. We're building the future, Eleanor. Or more accurately, we're building the tools that will rebuild the world after unprecedented destruction. As they approached the model, Eleanor recognized it as a representation of an entire city, but not as cities currently existed. This was a vision of urban design integrating technologies that were barely theoretical: automated transit systems, buildings with environmental controls beyond current capabilities, communication networks of extraordinary complexity. The war devastated cities across Europe and Asia, Dr. Fulton explained. Conventional thinking says we should rebuild them as they were, preserving cultural heritage while updating for modern convenience. We believe otherwise. She ran her hand above the model, indicating its innovative features. We have a once-in-history opportunity to reimagine urban environments from their foundations. The destruction, tragic as it was, has created a blank canvas in many locations. Rather than simply replacing what was lost, we can build something fundamentally better. Eleanor studied the model, her analytical mind immediately grasping both the technical brilliance and the practical challenges. The resources required would be astronomical, she said, and the political will to implement such radical designs. Captain Hayes interrupted. That's where your specific expertise becomes essential, Miss Winters. Your work on guidance systems during the war demonstrated an unparalleled ability to solve problems of precision at scale. We're not merely theorizing about future cities. We're developing the automated construction systems that will make them possible. He directed Eleanor's attention to a section of the model showing machinery, unlike anything currently in use in construction. These are the prototypes, semi-autonomous building systems that can operate continuously, requiring minimal human oversight while achieving unprecedented precision. The same mathematical principles that allowed your navigation systems to guide aircraft through enemy defenses can guide these machines through the complexities of modern construction. Eleanor leaned closer, her professional interest thoroughly engaged despite her reservations about the program's secrecy. You're talking about rebuilding faster than would be possible with conventional methods. Dr. Fulton nodded. Exponentially faster, and with resource efficiency that would make conventional approaches economically unviable by comparison. The implications unfolded in Eleanor's mind, a vision of war-torn cities rising from their ruins, not over decades but in mere years, incorporating technologies that would otherwise take generations to implement incrementally. If successful, it would alter not just the physical recovery from the war, but the entire trajectory of urban development globally. The technical challenges were enormous, but not insurmountable. With this team, this extraordinary collection of invisible minds, solutions that might seem impossible to the conventional scientific establishment became plausible. He turned slowly, surveying the room again, seeing it now not as a collection of overlooked individuals, but as perhaps the most concentrated assembly of innovative thinking on the continent. These were the people who had solved unsolvable problems during wartime, who had created technologies that generals had deemed miraculous, who had repeatedly achieved breakthroughs by approaching questions from perspectives that traditional scientific training would never have produced. "Why me?" Eleanor asked finally, turning back to Captain Hayes. "Why now? I've been sitting in my flat for weeks, reading about others taking credit for my work. What changed?" The captain's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested the question had touched on a sensitive point. "Circumstances have evolved," he said carefully. "International tensions are developing in ways that make your specific expertise particularly valuable." Martin moved closer, his voice lowered. "What she's not saying, Ellie, is that the Soviets have been recruiting. Their agents have approached at least 3 people who worked on projects adjacent to ours during the war. They're building their own team of invisible engineers." Eleanor processed this, understanding the new urgency. The war against fascism had ended, but another conflict was already taking shape. Not yet a shooting war, but a battle of innovation and implementation that would determine which vision of the future would prevail in the reconstruction of a devastated world. "Doctor," Fulton placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "We need you," he said simply. "Not just your technical abilities, though those are exceptional. We need your perspective, your approach to problem solving. The challenges ahead require minds that see patterns others miss, that question assumptions others accept without thought. Being overlooked has made all of us, observers of systems others take for granted. That perspective is precisely what this project requires." Eleanor felt the weight of the decision before her. Accepting meant continuing in official obscurity, watching while others received recognition for innovations she helped create. It meant living in the shadows while building the future, but refusing meant returning to her small flat, to diminishing opportunities as women were systematically removed from the technical positions they had filled during wartime, to watching her hard-won skills atrophy through disuse. And beyond personal considerations lay the larger question: who would shape the reconstruction of a broken world? Those who had prosecuted the war, or those who understood most intimately its costs? "Where do I begin?" Eleanor asked, her decision made. Captain Hayes smiled, the first genuine expression of emotion Eleanor had seen from her. "You've already begun, Miss Winters. Your notes on the phase transition problem," he nodded toward the folder Eleanor still carried, "represent an approach no one else on the team had considered. If you're ready, Dr. Fulton can show you to your quarters and brief you on immediate priorities." As Eleanor followed Dr. Fulton toward a door at the far end of the ballroom, Martin fell into step beside them. "It gets easier," he said quietly. "The invisibility, I mean. After a while, you start to see its advantages. We work without the distractions of publicity or politics. We answer to the problems themselves, not to committees or funding agencies or public opinion." He paused at a junction in the corridor, preparing to head in another direction. "And we have each other. People who understand both the work and the strange position we occupy in relation to it. That counts for something, in a world where so many connections have been broken." Dr. Fulton led Eleanor through a maze of corridors that seemed to alternate between the manor's original architecture and modern additions constructed with little concern for aesthetic consistency. "The residential wing retains most of its pre-war character," he explained as they entered a section where wood paneling and ornate moldings returned. "We found that living spaces designed for comfort rather than efficiency contribute to better long-term thinking. The technical areas follow function exclusively, but here we preserve certain humanities." He stopped before a door that might once have been a guest room in the country estate. "These will be your quarters. Comfortable if not spacious. The personal effects you requested from your London flat should arrive within the week." He handed Eleanor a key, a simple brass item that seemed anachronistic in a facility otherwise equipped with electronic security systems. "Some technologies, Doctor," Fulton said, noting Eleanor's expression, "remain perfectly adequate without innovation. We focus our technical efforts where advancement is most needed." He paused, studying Eleanor with an expression that mixed professional assessment with personal concern. "Rest today, familiarize yourself with the facility. Tomorrow we'll begin intensively. We've been waiting for someone with your specific insights, and there's considerable eagerness to incorporate your thinking into ongoing work." Left alone in the room, Eleanor set down her suitcase and surveyed her new accommodations. The space was indeed comfortable, a bedroom with adjoining sitting area, furnished with a mix of period pieces and more modern, functional items. A desk positioned before the window overlooked formal gardens, now partially repurposed for practical food production, a visual metaphor for the transformation of the entire estate, from aristocratic luxury to utilitarian research facility. On the desk lay a stack of files, each marked with classification levels she had never seen during her wartime work. The top folder bore a project name that meant nothing to her, Phoenix Foundation. Beneath it, in smaller text, Phase 1 Implementation, European Theatre. Eleanor ran her fingers over the embossed title, feeling the weight of implication in those simple words. Phoenix, the mythical bird reborn from its own ashes. A fitting metaphor for the task before them, creating new life from the ashes of unprecedented destruction. She moved to the window, looking out over the gardens where a few people walked along gravel paths, deep in conversation or solitary thought. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds, the same sun that shone on ruined cities throughout Europe and Asia, on displaced populations struggling to rebuild lives shattered by years of violence, on graveyards filled with millions whose futures had been permanently erased. The scale of reconstruction required was beyond anything humanity had previously attempted, not merely rebuilding physical structures, but reimagining societies traumatized by experiences that defied comprehension. Eleanor had seen the news reports, read the statistics, but numbers failed to convey the human reality of entire cities reduced to rubble, of populations psychologically shattered, of economies collapsed beyond conventional recovery strategies. The project outlined in the files on her desk proposed solutions that would seem utopian, if not for the assembled brilliance of the team tasked with their implementation. The invisible engineers, working in the shadows of history, might accomplish what visible institutions could not, a fundamental reimagining of human environments based on technologies that most believed were still theoretical rather than immediately applicable. A knock at her door interrupted these thoughts. Eleanor opened it to find Sarah Abramowitz, her former colleague now looking more formally dressed than during their wartime collaboration, though her eyes retained the intensity Eleanor remembered. "I thought you might appreciate some context before diving into those," she said, nodding toward the files on the desk. "The official briefings are comprehensive, but often miss the human elements that make this project what it is." Eleanor stepped aside, inviting her in. Their friendship during the war had been built on professional respect, rather than personal intimacy, but in this strange new environment, familiar faces carried outsized significance. Sarah seated herself in one of the chairs by the window, waiting until Eleanor had taken the other before speaking again. "What they haven't told you yet, what isn't in those files, is that this project grew from the personal experiences of those who designed it. Captain Hayes lost her entire family when Liverpool was bombed in 1941. Dr. Fulton's husband and son were killed in London during the Blitz. Professor Takobo's hometown in Japan was destroyed in the final months of the war. The official documentation presents Phoenix as a strategic initiative with geopolitical implications, which it certainly is. But at its core, it began as something more personal, a response to grief, a determination that future generations might be spared similar experiences through fundamental changes to how we design the environments in which human life unfolds." Eleanor considered this, understanding now the curious blend of clinical detachment and emotional intensity she had sensed in the project's leadership. "And the invisibility?" she asked. "Is that truly strategic, or is there another purpose?" Sarah smiled slightly, though the expression held little humor. "Both, I think. The strategic advantages are real. Working without public scrutiny allows for greater speed and flexibility, and protecting the team from being targeted by foreign intelligence is a legitimate concern. But there's another aspect that becomes clear once you've been here a while." She glanced toward the window, her expression distant. "Many of us find it easier to focus on building the future when we're not constantly reminded of our place in the present. The world out there," he nodded toward the world beyond the estate, "is rapidly returning to pre-war patterns. Women who ran factories are being sent back to kitchens. Colonial subjects who fought for Britain are being told their sacrifices don't merit full citizenship. Jews who survived the camps are facing renewed anti-Semitism. The invisible status that seems like erasure is also, paradoxically, a form of freedom from those constraints. Here, your work is judged solely on its merits, not filtered through prejudices about who should be capable of producing it." This perspective shifted Eleanor's understanding of her situation. The invisibility that had initially felt like an extension of wartime erasure revealed its more complex dimensions, both constraint and liberation. both strategic necessity and personal shelter. "How long have you been here?" she asked. Sarah considered the question. "In this particular facility, about 8 months. But I've been part of the invisible infrastructure since mid-1943, when my work on signal processing algorithms attracted attention from people who recognized its potential applications beyond the immediate war effort. I was officially reassigned to clerical duties in the public record, while actually being moved to a classified research unit. My family believes I work as a government typist." She smiled wryly at this cover story, so misaligned with her formidable technical abilities. Some of the others have been operating in this shadow capacity even longer. Professor Reed has been officially on sabbatical for health reasons since 1939, when his early work on material stress analysis suggested applications that remain classified even now.